Hey y'all, welcome back. It's KimBoo, the Task Mistress. I've gotten a few questions about project management, and so I wanted to go over what project management is because it's really a very simple thing. I don't expect this video to go too long, but it is important to understand why it is a special thing, unique and of its own paradigm, concept, idea, whatever you want to use there. So project management is simple because it only has 5 steps, like 5 fingers on my hand, and I'm showing up to the camera, and 5 steps. So I'm going to tell you what those 5 steps are, and then I'm going to explain why a whole industry has risen up, project management, around these 5 steps. Especially since it's going to seem blindingly obvious if you've never had any exposure to project management before. So here we go. The first step is imagination. It's the conceptual part. It's when you think of an idea and you get excited about it and you think that maybe, a beautiful thing could happen, right? Or business or whatever, relationship. Use whichever thing means the most to you in this example as we go forward. So 2 is the planning stage. The planning stage is obviously where you start planning. It starts with setting some due dates for yourself possibly, or figuring out more accurately, maybe doing outlines, to-do lists, things like that. Setting up your pins so they can be knocked down. The 3rd step is what is called the implementation step. There's some, I don't want to call it controversy, but there is a part of the project management world that doesn't really consider this a step. But I do, because I think there is an important part to the launching, the implementation stage, and I'm going to circle back around and to explain why in a minute. 4 is the ongoing stage. It sometimes is called maintenance. I don't think that's a very good word for it. It is the actual process of creating or doing the thing, right? It is the thing. 4th is wrap up. That is when you put a bow on it. It's done. Usually this is the stage where you do some analysis, you do some self-reflection, or if you're my father and was in the military, an after-action report where you look at the money you've spent, the energy and time you spent, and try to make some conclusions about that, whether the program was successful. And even if it wasn't successful, those types of reflections are even more important. So you may be asking, okay, that's it? KimBoo, that's it? That's all? That's all the project management? How are people being paid 6 figures to be project managers? Well, that's because project management depends on the project being managed. And by that I mean, and I mentioned this in Rise to the Task, my outline for the personal projects management method, that your expertise is what sets a particular project apart from all the others. And so what you bring to the table to manage that project is your knowledge and your understanding of the field or the industry that you're in. So let's take one that most people are pretty familiar with, even if they're not aware of the basics. Let's take project management for a commercial construction firm. They're building a really big building. It's 5 stories, it's 10 stories, whatever. It's large, it's going to have offices, it's going to have shops. So a project manager like that has to understand not just the basics of construction, not just understand how to read blueprints, but that project manager has to know how long things take. That project manager has to know how to do budgets. If there's only so much budget to pour the foundation, then the project manager sometimes is involved in hiring the people who are going to do the work. Sometimes they're not. A lot depends, again, on the people and the firms and the industry. But in this particular case, they at least have to be aware, for instance, of how long it takes to pour a foundation and how much materials are required and generally what the cost is going to be. So moving forward with that analogy, let's talk about those 5 simple stages, right? Those 5 simple stages are: 1, ideation, conception, the idea of the building takes shape. You might have hired an architect at this point, or you might not have. You might just be sketching out ideas. Probably you do own the property on which the building is going to be built. If you don't, then you're shopping around for it at this point. But you're coming up with the concept and how it's going to look. At this point, you go into the second stage, which is planning. Now the second and the fourth stages are generally, I'm like counting my fingers, wait, 1, 2, 3. So the second and the fourth stages usually take the longest. Like conception, usually, especially with me and my projects, I like wake up and I'm like, oh, I have an idea. And it's not quite fully formed, but it's close to it. Then I get in the planning stage and I can be there for a long time. If you're doing, again, our example, commercial building construction, then that stage could take a very long time because you're hiring the architects, they're submitting their proposals, eventually blueprints are being made, and don't forget on a project at that scale, there's not a set of blueprints, there is a set of a lot of different blueprints. There's the structural blueprints, there's the electrical blueprints, there's the plumbing blueprints, it goes on and on and on. So you've got a lot, but you're planning. You might be at the stage of hiring subcontractors. You might be at the stage of hiring on-site managers, people who can keep an eye on things when it actually gets rolling. But you're still essentially in the planning stage. Nothing has actually happened yet. As far as the building part goes, you're planning to build the building. The implementation stage, to me, is an important stage to demarcate as an independent stage, because during this stage, this is when you set the elements of place that actually start moving the gears. For a construction project, that would be going and checking all the zoning ordinances and putting in the requests and getting all the licensing and actually putting money down for materials. Because of course you figured out all the materials you need based on during your planning stages. Actually hiring the plumbers and the electricians and setting up times and dates. If you're the project manager at a project at this point, you're really running between the planning and the implementation stage, because you've got to figure out that, okay, well, you're hiring them, but when are they going to be needed? Well, you're going back to the plans and you're looking at what the order of events has to be. So to me, the implementation stage is its own separate little thing. Big, important thing. It's when the gears actually start moving. Now we get to the implementation stage, and this is where all the gears start moving together. You've made the plans, you've gotten everything laid out the way you need it to be. So now you're actually pouring the foundation. You're actually getting the plumbers in there to lay all the pipes and what's-its and doodads, then the electricians, and then eventually interior decorators. Like, it's all the way up the line. And this is the reason I get caught up in trying to explain too many things at once. But the reason the project manager is such an important part of this process is because it's not like you just pull the trigger, pull the line and let it go. What happens is that you've got the plumbing people have to come in and lay the plumbing before the foundation is poured, because there's some plumbing that needs to be embedded into the foundation. But then you're going to have the plumbers come back after the foundation is poured and the walls are being built, because there's obviously parts of plumbing that has to go up onto the building. So all of these things have to be, fit together very, very carefully and timed perfectly. This is where a commercial building construction project manager is using their expertise to understand which stage they're at and how it needs to be managed at that particular stage. So then, of course, we get to the fifth, and that is the resolution, the conclusion. The building is done. The bow has been cut. The doors are open. For most people, you think, well, okay, the building's done and that's it. For the people running that project, this is the point to go back and say, what were our costs for this? And why was it more expensive or less expensive than we anticipated? What could we have done to save money in the future? Did this company work well with us? What kind of problems did we have with that company? Let's never use those electricians again. You're going back and you're analyzing what happened. So that's the way it would fold out in a commercial construction industry building. For you as a solopreneur, I'm assuming that you're not building a multi-million-dollar commercial building. But for you, it might be a case of you have a business idea. That's the, conception, imagination part. You sit down and you start planning your business idea. You start looking at competition. You start looking at costs. You start looking at what services or products you're actually going to offer. You start looking at, especially if it's a manufacturing or a product, you start kind of digging around and how that whole process works if you're not already familiar with it. You start making a plan, a business plan if you're going to be looking for investors, and that's all part of the planning stage. The implementation stage might be when the money starts coming in and you're building a website. You're putting all the pieces in place in the manufacturing process if you're manufacturing a product. You put everything into motion that you've been planning on. The ongoing stage in this particular case is actually running the business. The website is done, doors are open, you're selling your project or your services. At this point, something like marketing might become a much more important part of your day. You've already done everything else, like you've got the production team up and running, or you've got all your services outlined on your website and priced appropriately, and all the store elements are in place. So now you're looking at getting the word out, building your email list, all that sort of stuff. Now, with a business like that, there's probably not going to be like a hard and fast resolution endpoint. But if you are starting a business, a good way to think of it as the start of the business is its own project. So at the point that you've cranked it up, you've gone through implementation, you've got everything in place and it's starting to run, you might consider that, okay, we're closing the door on this part of my business, which was the startup part. And reflect on the problems that you had. Did you like your website designer or not? Did you have problems with manufacturing? Was it, you send it to China, but then shipping delays, bringing it back caused a major delay and a hassle for you trying to get orders out? I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but there's a lot that could go into that, which is why that finishing part, even though a lot of people are just like, oh, we're done, we're moving on, that's an important part. That is what project management is. Those 5 steps. Like, that's it. That's 5 steps. Anybody can do those 5 steps. You do those 5 steps all the time already. Like, just think of planning a birthday party. Like, you go through all of those 5 steps if you're planning a birthday party. A wedding planner, I guarantee you a wedding planner is very familiar with project management. Even if they're not using that term, they're doing event planning. It's very much a project, and they very much go through those 5 stages, even if they don't identify them as such as project management tools. So I just wanted to go over those ideas with you here to try to give you a really clear insight into why project management might be the missing piece for you as a solopreneur. If time management is failing you, if all your tasks and to-do lists are failing you, if things are still falling through the cracks, or alternatively, you just feel overwhelmed and you can't seem to get a handle on anything, maybe it's time to sit down and stop managing your time and start managing your projects. So I have a lot of ways to help you with that. Of course, I do one-on-one coaching, not very often. That's not something I offer too much, but I do have other things instead. I have Rise to the Task, which is my how-to manual on implementing personal projects management method, which goes into step-by-step how to do all of this with everything you're trying to do in your life. It's very thorough, so it's on my website. You'll see down there, taskmistress.com on the card. Go buy that, take a look through it. If you have questions about it, please feel free to email me at kimboo@task-mistress.com. Later on, this is being filmed in November of 2022, so I don't know if you're seeing this way down the road, maybe you'll see something different, but I am planning on starting a membership group for people who want to learn how to implement project management in their own lives, both personally and professionally with their businesses. So be looking for that if you're catching this when it first comes out. I'll be doing a lot of office hours and how-tos for members so that they can really, dig into this and see how they can use it to make their lives much less complicated. Because friends, there is more to life than staring at your calendar, trying to figure out what you need to do. All right, so trust me on that one. Been there, done that, but I can help you get past that and really achieve what you're trying to achieve. So thanks for hanging in there with me. This is the KimBoo York, the Task Mistress herself, and I will see y'all around. Bye.